with Kevin and Brady to put this together. So this afternoon, we are about to have our conversation regarding DEI. And diversity, equity, inclusion is not reverse discrimination. And the way we're going to plan to do this is we have our panelists, I tell them the dynamic super women that are here, and they will talk about their stories, what they've been working on in this field. And towards the end, our ask is going to be, each of them will have an ask so that we could all get together. What we find out is that everyone is doing something different individually, and that's the purpose of being here collaborating today and the whole 3 days that we've been here together. And I am Denise Rosemont. For those that don't know me, I am Managing Director or Managing Partner of Diversity Works. And we are an organization that really help organizations define their strategy when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't just set goals, but we help them achieve, improve, and look at their progress as things are going on. We tend to do things in a way that we look at their strategic plan and offer them an opportunity to look at things with a light, whether a stoplight, how you're ready to go, the green maybe to go, the red to stop, and the yellow is something you need to look at. So with that in mind, we'll go on to the next slide, please. What we wanted to do is offer you an opportunity before we get to my panelists here, and I'll let them introduce themselves. When we talk about DEI is not reverse discrimination, I think there's a discrepancy of what this DEI is about. People think it's just about race, ethnicity. It's about so much more. And we put this, you've seen this before when Holly talked about the executive directive from President Biden, that he's saying that it's important that we advance equity. When we deal with DEI, we really talk about equity. We want to make sure that that's understood, because back in the day, and I tell everyone when I was doing DEI work, and we only talked about it, diversity and inclusion. The equity piece wasn't in there. And the great thing about it is now we're looking at it for everyone. It's not just one person or one thing, one flavor of the month. So the misnomer about what it is, these ladies will really refine that and let us understand that. It's not one piece. So when we look at the directives that the president has put on, when we're doing a session, we facilitate and we let our corporate partners understand that. It's in the federal government, and it's also good for business. Good for business in a lot of different ways. The statistics says, and it indicates, all the data's there. People are saying, well, where's the data? Where's the data? Especially with all these lawsuits going on. The data has always been there. Nothing has really changed. It depends on who's in power, who wants to retain that power, and how they want to see things go. And so you get this propaganda that's going on. And so we'll go next slide, please. So we want to know that President Biden also said, let's advance racial equity. And I want you to see the bad guys. One of my partners, we put this together, we look at them. These are the problems that's really facing the culture wars here. So we have our anti-critical race theory activism, and they are real. This is not a game. They are very deliberate and intentional about what they want to do. They want to make sure that they really repeal all the things that have been going on historically through all the legislations and the bills that we've created. So you have the Christopher Rufo. He opposes LGBT topics in classrooms, and he ousted the Harvard president. Then you have Stephen Miller. He's Trump's senior advisor. Now, he's been against transgender rights, anti-immigration, and anti-diversity hiring. Like, what's wrong with really making sure everybody gets a chance at the table and not just a few? But for some people, they believe it. And I was having a conversation today that if you don't think it's about you, when they come for you, no one will be there. I think Viktor Frankl's note says, or the quote says about that, when they came for the Christians, I didn't say anything. When they came for the Baptists, I didn't say anything. When they came for the women, I didn't say anything. But when they came for me, no one was left. So really, we're in this together. It's not just about one perspective. And then we look at Elon Musk, we know that. Now it's all about propaganda again, and Bill Aikman. So just want to make sure that you know that some of the players, there's lots more, but these are some of the few that are very active. Next slide, please. Brady, next slide. Oh, okay, sorry, yeah. All right. Well, while we're waiting for Brady, we are just going to go on because we know it's the end of the day and we're trying to get everyone out of here. So I'm going to go around and let all the superpower women introduce themselves and tell us what you've been working on, and then towards the end, you tell your stories. I know that Lynn has been doing a lot on a lot of the bills, and that's the beauty of coming to a session like this, because I found out that what we wanted to do at Diversity Works is put something together, some type of legislation regarding repealing of some of these cases and things that are happening, and I know that Lynn has been working on that. So Lynn, go ahead and then pass it on to LaTanya and then Tamika.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Again, I want to welcome everybody here, and thank you guys for joining us today, and also those who are online. Appreciate you guys tuning in. My name is Lynn Pingle. I'm the CEO of Mackey Company, and I lead, along with 5 other individuals, a group in the state of Minnesota addressing the lawsuit around Ultima versus USDA and SBA. And it is essentially a lawsuit that removes race as a factor of consideration in procurement and contracting. And obviously this is stemming from the work of one of the guys that you guys saw here on the screen with American Legal, Adam Miller, but there's also another guy out of Texas. And so I say that because, Mackey Company is an industry consulting company, and we work specifically with minorities, women, veteran, and small, diverse businesses, right? And within that realm, we, as a group, understand what the struggles are. We understand what the entrepreneur's journey is in getting contracts with the government. Mackey Company itself has successfully assisted a little under 200 Black, brown, women-owned businesses achieve about $87 million. Now, we don't say that we did it for them. We say we sprinkle a little bit of fairy dust to get them on their way and win. And while that is awesome and that is great, the lawsuit that came down and the decision of the Supreme Court to remove race as a factor in contracting does not necessarily give us that level playing field that was mentioned earlier in conversation. It also does not allow us to move that proverbial needle any further. I spoke earlier about the current status of contracting in the United States, especially in the DBE program, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, that is predominantly set, it's a program of preference for minorities, women, economic and social disadvantage. And within that program that's originally designated for us, people of color, 96% and 96% of the contracts are going to non-minority women, leaving 4% to 6% to communities of color. That 4 to 6% is what we are going to discuss today, because they're even going after our 4 to 6%, because they want the whole pie. And so I'm going to end with that and pass this on as we sort of dive into this conversation, but that is what I want to bring forth today, is that sense of awareness of reverse discrimination in procurement and contracting, and how it's appearing to be pulling the rug from underneath us, and we are not aware. So hopefully this is a platform to bring awareness to that. Thank you.
And I was so interested in what Lynn was saying, I forgot the question.
Well, just tell us what you've been working on. I know you've been doing a lot of anti-DI,
Okay.
anti-racist.
That's good, girl. Hi, everybody. My name is LaTanya Pegues. I am here from Austin, Texas. And we've been in the news a lot for a lot of not so great reasons. And actually, this might be a good time. Brady, is the slideshow still kind of acting up a little bit?
I think so.
Okay, because I got a great slide I want to show you all, just to give you some perspective. And that was great too, Denise, what you shared, just to kind of hone us in and to see those faces together and what their agenda is. But again, my name is LaTanya Pegues. We are here in the nation's capital, so I've got to give a shout out to any Bison in the building, Howard University, that's my alma mater. There we go. I knew I was going to get an HU somewhere. You know. And so with my background as a scientist and engineer, low temperature physicist actually, and worked on spacecraft. A lot of people interact with satellites while they're in orbit. But there's only a handful of us, well, a small group around the world who've actually worked on satellites before they were launched and before they left the planet. And so I'm just really honored to be one of those folks who had that experience. And then also being part of a team to make them go to get them them to outer space so you can enjoy what they were designed to do. But just share that to say that, a lot of times in these elite circles, like science, engineering, politics, wealth, that there are certain perspectives that are heard and believed and passed on through time. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Watson, who received a Nobel Prize for the double helix. Well, that was awesome, but then he also said a lot of bad things, specifically of black people, saying that we were monkeys and, our brain capacity, we could only do so small things, but we know we can do so much more. But I bring that up to say that a lot of these thoughts and ideas are still around. So even though that was, I think, around 1960, 50 time frame, but the books that were written, that was seen as law, as far as the things that people learned, and especially in the tech community, because they're kind of just really one-laned, if you will, and not really good at going outside of their tech lane and, interacting more like me. I'm a real social person. You would never know that. But a lot of people are still thinking that way. And here, in these hallowed halls that we are in today, some of these people were educated during that time. And so even though they may not be overtly saying that we think you're dumb, that we think you're monkeys, that you don't need to learn anything, that you don't need to have any wealth, that we own you, oh my goodness, is it Donette? Talking about us as being insured and, assets that people can leverage for different type of funding opportunities until that asset is no longer as, how can we say, valuable. That right there is a book. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, so there's so much, that goes into these kind of conversations. And I guess you could say, I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, I'm not that, but I've done a lot of studying as far as understanding how we make decisions, the types of things that we do, what is our bias and our unconscious bias. And Tamika, she just took most of what I was going to share on that. So if you were here for the earlier session, you heard that too. But there's just so much that goes into how people make decisions and the things that they don't. Oh, perfect, thank you so much. So I wanted to show you all this graphic, and I'm going to get up. I want to show you something. So these yellow areas are areas that have already passed DEI anti-bias bills. All right? The blue ones are the areas where they've been introduced. Do you all see this map of the United States of America? And is it almost in color? This is a problem. This is an urgent matter. And in the orange states are where they already have been enacted. So you see Texas, you see Kentucky, you see, I think this is Utah, yes. All right? So this is 30 states in the United States who've already been doing this type of damage. What was that, Kevin? At the moment. This was based on, let me see, when was this? This is recent data, so maybe that wasn't.
Florida, they've been added.
Right. Good point. They missed one. NBC missed one. This is the NBC source. Introduce bills banning or limiting DEI initiatives during their current legislative session.
It was during their legislative session. Oh.
Yes.
We know.
So if you want to say 30 or 31, but I wanted you to pictorially see the urgency of what we are dealing with in these United States today. So if you need an action that you haven't been fired up already in this amazing minority summit that everybody has been working so hard, Kia, Kevin, Brady, and everyone else, this image right here should get you going. Tamika.
That fires me up, and I already knew it. And I'm mad all over again. I'm Tamiko Stanley. Hello again. I'm the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Elite Executive Strategies. And what we do is we focus on helping organizations integrate policy and procedures to intentionally include people of color and diverse talent and diverse perspectives into their operations. And so, in a nutshell, I am the complete opposite of the slide that she showed of the 6 gentlemen. So the work that I do is actually the polar opposite of what they're doing, is to make sure that we are not being afraid to be intentional about the inclusion of people of color, because we were not afraid to be intentional about the exclusion of people of color. And so we should not be trying to be inclusive on accident or pretend like it was happenstance. We want it to be just as deliberate as the inequity was. And so that is pretty much the summary of my work. I've worked in every industry for over 30 years, including working with FedEx and government with the city of Pittsburgh, Luminous Health here in Maryland, and sports with Major League Baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the wonderful thing about these ladies is that each one does some work that's very important in the field of DEI. And it may not say directly DEI, but it is. When we talk to LaTanya, she does a lot of bias work. And that's one way to sort of alleviate what's happening for us to look internally. And with Tamika, she definitely looks at the racist aspect of it. We talk about structural racism. We'll get a chance for her to really delve into that, because it all has to do historically, how we have been marginalized. And if you don't understand your history, you won't understand your current situation to know how to make a change. But the final piece to make the change is really that we get together. So we'll go back to Linda now. Lynn, could you tell us about the narrative requirements for proving disadvantage, influence, minority business with the work that you've been doing, and talk about the bills that you've have at the table?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, intentional, deliberate, and I'm going to add a third one, purposeful. There has to be a purpose. This lawsuit threw out disparity studies that we have used, the government agencies have used to create set-aside programs like the DBE, MBE, WBE, and veterans. They threw it all away, and a disparity study analyzes what is in the system that is working, not working, how does it look as it relates to equality and equity in procurement and contracting, because each state is $1 billion entity, and what percentage of that is going across the board for these set-aside programs. So when the Ultima lawsuit, basically a non-minority woman who went after the USDA SBA program because she was losing revenue because they put it under to set aside. And so the primary suit was that it was not fair under the stance of the SBA USDA, which is the rebuttable presumption, compelling interest, narrowly tailored, and strict scrutiny. They fell on all those 4 accounts. One, because they did not vet nor document the history of every individual in their program. What does that mean? They sent an application, tell me, and I'll wait if none of you guys checked boxes to say, you're black, you're brown, you're a woman, you're a male, veteran, and so on. If you didn't, I'll wait. Okay. We all did, and we all got categorized. And because you were categorized, you must be discriminated upon. Under rebuttable presumption, you got to prove that you're going to heal past discrimination. If you understand how procurement works, that's why they set goals on projects. I made mention earlier, I've aspired my goal to lose weight for the last 10 years. In order to do that, I've got to watch my diet, my exercise, and so on, right? But nobody's monitoring what I eat. Nobody's monitoring my activities or my number of steps, right? So if that's not being done in the manner in which it will satisfy that strict scrutiny of helping heal past discrimination, leveling the playing field, and providing opportunities, then the program is defunct. That's what happened with the 8A program, right? So I say that because now they took the Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, and said, hey, you're discriminating against me because I'm not a person of color, right? And the Ultima lawsuit started that. The Harvard affirmative action kicked it off. And it's being pulled from underneath us. How? Because we are not aware. We don't know. So the work that I'm doing in the state of Minnesota, I approached 5 of my colleagues, all black and brown businesses, and said, hey, are you aware? And they said no. Well, let's get you aware. And we reached out to our network, and we hosted a convening back in November 15th. And about 25, 35 people showed up. We had some folks on Zoom as well. And we started educating. And what was amazing about our group is we didn't come in pitchfork storming, upset, doing the normal things that we do when we don't get ours. What we did was, how do we come together? Because what we didn't want is for you to walk out of that room and say, yeah, but I'm not buying it, right? And so not a single person in that room said, I'm not buying it. They actually were afraid. And we set out a notion that we are going to work with the government agencies shoulder to shoulder, because if the agencies get sued, we get screwed. There's so many things that we could do, and one of the things that we did do was keep our community informed about this lawsuit. Right now, we're about 137 or so strong, black, brown, veteran, and women-owned businesses that are championing for change. We're actually championing to acknowledge that racism does exist. We are the state of Minnesota. I'm probably going to get in trouble by saying the state of Minnesota is the epicenter of racism, right? You guys know the George Floyd murder, the Dante Wright. Less than 6 months ago, another black American was murdered during a traffic stop. Did you guys hear about that? No. Why? It's becoming a normal thing in Minnesota, if you think about it. Philando Castile was also in Minnesota, if you guys recall. There's just a series of them, right? It's a normalcy almost. I hate to say it. So what are we doing about it? What can we do about it? Our group, again, crafted a bill, a race, equity, and inclusion in procurement and contracting. We are unapologetically saying, government of Minnesota, acknowledge that race is a factor in the state of Minnesota. Everybody's telling us it's unconstitutional because of the decision of the Supreme Court. Everybody's telling us that 25% is a quota. But nobody's paying attention to the fact that we are not looking to create new rules. We looked at the procurement status, 16C in the state of Minnesota, that addresses that the commissioner can set 25% for set-aside businesses. They already said it. So we're not introducing anything new. We're just owning, as communities of color, that 25%. But they're looking at it as a quota, and a quota is against the rules, right? Earlier in the conversation, we had Yun Song from Washington. And Washington State stood strong and said, nope, we're preserving our minority programs. That's what we need. We need those leaders to come talk to the other leaders and say, go ahead, come at us, but we're standing behind what we're doing, right? The second component that I think about here is the details. The devil's in the details, right? How can we be purposely lining up what steps we need to take to get to that 25%? That's really the message here. We need to change the narrative of DEI to be more about the steps you can take. We've acknowledged diversity. We know it's about our differences, characteristics, everything, right? The iceberg, only the tip is what we acknowledge, but underneath the iceberg is all the other characteristics of diversity that, because we don't see it, we're not acknowledging, right? It's about equity and inclusion, and the regulations that's stemming from this lawsuit is taking away that 4%. It's taking away that equity. So if you sit back and not pay attention, you are going to lose that 4%. So the bill is about changing the narrative of how can we be more inclusive versus exclusive. How can we create pathways so that the agencies don't get sued? How about we co-author as a minority business council the policies that are meant for us, instead of having agencies write it on our behalf, right? That kind of makes more sense, right? We're not saying you're out of it. We're saying, let us sit at the table and pick up the pen and be authors of this policy. Come to us and negotiate instead of just shutting us down and saying, nope, 25% is a quota. Nope, it's unconstitutional because quotas say so. You know what you have to do because you know the right thing to do. And DEI is about making the decision to acknowledge that equity does not exist when communities of color are involved. And I think I'll wrap up with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One thing I wanted to add, so what can be done to make sure that the DI and ESG is really the narrative? You talk about the narrative to make sure that those two are in synchronization together.
You know, it's so hard because I fear how ESG is being applied. ESG theoretically is awesome, but yeah, environmental, social, and governance. So that's like the new, you know how paradigm was the jam and the conversation back in the 90s and such, and then paradigm shifted and everything was paradigm shifted. So DEI is paradigm shifting onto ESG. They're removing DEI because you know what? DEI sounds like a lawsuit. And the hard part about DEI, the intent was good. The execution failed. Just like the policies. The policies were good. The people that started implementing it, DEI was supposed to help level the playing field. It was not a response to Mr. George Floyd's murder. It was not a response to anything. DEI has existed even before because we are a melting pot. We are a melting pot. We have different cultures and ethnic groups in the United States. And in order for acknowledgement of those cultures, DEI paved the way. ESG is the new jam, right? Environmental, social, and governance. What does that look like in a contracting realm? Well, let me tell you, we're going to put a goal of 25% on ESG. But they do not, once again, spell out the details of how you are to meet ESG. They're simply saying 25% ESG goal. So, what does environmental look like? You know what? I'm going to put a ton of solar panels at 25%. Done. I don't have to pay attention to social. I don't have to pay attention to governance. Well, guess where social is? Where we live, where communities of color and gender live. We are social, right? But I'll argue with myself, but socials also impact community. If you bring jobs, oh, we're going to meet social. But our conversation before that, you gentrify, sure you brought jobs just to build the box in opportunity zones, and then you abandoned the place. You played landlord to build the box, and you gave no sustainability. That's also social governance, but I brought jobs. Get out of here. Let me give you a drill down of what social under ESG should look like. So when you are talking in rooms of ESG, please ask the right questions. And if you don't know, call them. What questions should you be asking when an ESG program comes into play? Because if you ask a person of color about DEI, the definition is a heck of a lot different.
As we move on to that, thank you for that, Lynn. That's great. Regarding economic and social terrorism, that's part of the term that we're going through here, so different one.
Like that economic and social terrorism. It's powerful.
Tamika, as Chief Diversity Officer, just wanted to, if you could give us some examples of strategies that you've used effectively to communicate the purpose and goals of DEI, and so that it's not, it's regarded in a way that's safe but very impactful.
Sure. And just also there's a lot of terms and a lot of new concepts that are being introduced, similar to ESG, to soften the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would say the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons for it, but I think the number one reason for it is because DEI did what it was supposed to do, and it created change. And one thing people fear more than anything else, unfortunately, is change, because there is a misconception that change means that my position will be less than what it is today. If I'm cutting more slices of the pie, therefore my slice is smaller, and that's not true. But, you know, one of the things that I do to first really illustrate what structural and systemic racism looks like, and unfortunately, I can't remember if it was Yale or Stanford. I'm going to say Stanford, but do not quote me on that because it might be Yale. But I always use the Monopoly experiment, and I think it was Stanford who did the very first one. And what they did in this experiment is they took a couple populations of professional workers and pretty much said, you have the day off from work because all we're going to ask you to do is play the game of Monopoly. And what they did was they invited all the African American employees to come play first. And they said, just play the game of Monopoly. About 4 rounds in, they invited people of other racial backgrounds. The last group to be invited to the game of Monopoly were the white professionals. And then at the end of the experiment, they asked each group to talk about their experience in their day off, their game. And everyone, except for the white professionals, had a wonderful day off. And you want to know why the white professionals hated that game of Monopoly? Here's what they said. By the time we got to the game, all the property was bought up, so every time I rolled the dice, I landed on something and had to pay. I wanted to go to jail just so I didn't land on something to owe somebody, and I was hoping I passed go to get a little bit more money so I could pay to keep on rolling around the board. So to enter into the society, into the economy at a gross deficit is really the illustration of systemic racism. And so for people to act like that's so far in the past, and what are we riled up about today in 2024, is really that game of Monopoly. All of the trickle-down effects that really creates an opportunity for people of color. And so for us to say we want to create opportunity on purpose for people of color should not be something that we water down with new concepts, should not be something that we shy away from because it's uncomfortable and we try to label it as reverse discrimination, which that term itself is ridiculous, and how we continue to find ourselves in a space where we're defending against that at the highest court of the land almost makes me feel like I'm not awake. And so what we have to do is be just as bold about opposing the concept that reverse discrimination is real. Just think about the term itself. That's impossible. We're talking about generations of being left behind. So there's an opportunity that's being provided, especially for me. So what? Who made that disgusting? The notion itself is ridiculous to me.
Thank you. And to build on that, this is why we put up, when we're doing our sessions, we talk about structural racism. It's the overarching, that's all across the place that you're saying. It's in the air, I say. So it's built over time. It was created, that results in a disadvantage for people of color. And then when the institutions adopt it, either your corporation or organization, then that's the institutional part. It's race-based. The policies are there. They're already there. It's nothing new they created. They've already been in your system. So that's why you say you're institutional. And then the interpersonal, again, is between the individuals. And then a lot of times what you hear about is a focus on the individual. They're talking about actions that they perpetuated against racism. So that's a great point I love the Monopoly analogy, because that really tells, I usually tell people that that's where redlining occurs, at the structural piece, and that's why you have rules in place and policies to change that, because it's been happening for so long that a lot of people who don't remember. And I remember when I was doing my research about China, one of the things, I think someone asked Masa Tang, why did you remove all the signs? And he said, we keep the signs there so people can remember. I think what happens is that we become ignorance to what's been happening, what happened in the future historically. Our children don't know about it, and we perpetuate the decision. So now they're coming with reverse discrimination, but again, DI is not about reverse discrimination. DI is about incorporating everyone in the process. And the research indicates 70% of individuals, even people coming into the new job, say they believe in DI. So why do you have a big group of rich donors that are trying to eliminate and stop it because of the fear factor? And I'll just let you, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes. I know the time is going real quick. And LaTanya, why don't you tell us about some of the initiatives you put together so that you are making it more inclusive for people to understand? Because I know you do a lot of the bias piece, but if you give us an example, we do a lot of piece. We deal with it with the effect of privilege. A lot of people are afraid of that term, but I find that it becomes real when you show people, illustrate that we all have some type of privilege, but those had it a little bit more than others, and that puts us in a different context. So go ahead.
I don't think it's been, thank you, acknowledged today that today is International Women's Day. So I wore purple on behalf of the International Women, and I am US born, but I mention that right about now because when we're talking about removal of certain things and, not inclusion, so you're not going to celebrate International Women's Day anymore? Kind of what Denise was talking about as far as, certain people are going to be excluded today. Well, who's next? So these are certain things to think about, Some people don't like talking about Black History Month, and I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? And I know some people get upset because we talk about a month, but every day of that month, I'm so excited to say happy and Black together. Because in these United States, you don't really hear much about Black and happiness. So my friends are like, LaTanya, we know it's Happy Black History. I said, you gonna hear from me? And I got one more day this year because we had a leap year. I'm gonna say it again. So yes, clap that up, right? Happy and Black. So I just want to take a quick little turn because we have to be intentional, I say, about ways that we're amplifying Black voices. And it's okay to do that. You can say, oh my goodness, did you know, Daniel, our awesome photographer, did you know that every time you look at your phone, that when you know who's calling before you answer, that's an African-American woman's invention? And she lives right here in Washington, D.C. And oh my goodness, she was one of the first people, the first women to get her PhD in physics from MIT. Isn't that cool? You see how I just interjected that into a conversation? And the world went around because of her invention and still is during the pandemic. Another beautiful African-American woman who's alive today, Marion Croak. She's got her PhD, she's at YouTube doing big things, over 250 patents, but because of her, we can do Skype, we can do Zoom, we can do FaceTime, we can do Duo. We got through the pandemic because of just those two Black women's inventions that I mentioned. So the world cannot run without us. They need us. And until they realize that they do, there's some things that we can do to remind them. And that is that I say, we're in voting season and we're in here where we are, where elected officials come. But let's talk about voting with our dollars. So if someone's not supporting me, a certain state that's up here, even though I live in a certain state, and somebody had mentioned that that state wasn't colored in like it should be, I'm not going there. Back in the 60s, they used a term, it started with a B and ended with a T, boycott. My sister earlier said divest. So some of you already have, some of your organizations, your national organizations might be in some of these 30 states. You're big to do, you're big to-da. Well, do like the Alphas did. They're like, oh, Florida, you're gonna do what? We're not having our convention there. That's Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, okay? And I was like, go ahead, brothers, lead the way on that. That's what we need to do. And so for some reason, certain communities don't really hear us until their people, or their property or their finances are affected. And so for some reason, that's when we really get their attention. And I live in Texas, in Austin. People think this is wonderful, purple dot in a blue state. No, it's not. They value trees, salamanders, and something else, the river or something, more than they do Black lives. So, so this issue of greed, let's just call it what it is, corporate greed. Some people think that we should have nothing while others think they should have everything. And I did want to say too, and I love that graphic that you showed of those 4 men earlier. Was it 4? It's hard to see, my back is turned, whatever the number is. And Bill Ackerman, he was very influential in making sure that Claudine Gay, the first African-American Harvard president, was no longer the president. And it's so interesting because, speaking of unconscious bias and the fact that he was saying, she was cheating on her dissertation and she was doing all these things, and we all know that's not true because she did it she did not cheat, she did not do plagiarism, but her research is in line with what's standard today. But the ironic part about it, and the unconscious bias part on his part, is that his very wife did exactly what he accused Claudine Gay of doing.
Thank you.
He did not realize the fact that he was telling his own story. And so it's so important that when we hear these things and get this information, that we remember that. So again, I'm coming from a perspective of ways that we can have these conversations and talk to people about certain things. It's like, isn't that interesting, Hal? Did you know that? Coming from that perspective, because we want to be heard. And some of us, we don't like anyone to tell us what to do, right? So, and I'm being very good here, but there's a part of me that can surely be outraged about some of the things that we're sharing. But I had to learn, in order to be heard, I had to come in a way and really suppress that part of myself so that I can be heard. And it's so ironic that, they want to talk about the angry black woman and the angry black man. Well, there are plenty of angry white men. And they stormed the Capitol on January the 6th.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm digressing.
Well, as we're getting ready to end, at the age of diversity and initiatives and really taking accountability, I'd like you each to just say one thing that you ask that you have now for the group that's here. And and then the video is going to go out. So this is your chance to say, what do you ask? And keep it short and simple, please.
I would probably say research. Read and research. One, because there's so much going on in this realm of removing race as a factor across anything. And you have to be informed, and you have to figure out how that fits in your repertoire. It needs to be, like she said, acknowledged in every state, in every city. One thought that I had when you talk about boycott, right? The United States boasts about small business and that we are the fire, we are the engine of this country. There are more black women entrepreneurs today than anyone else, and they are leading the way in changing lives, not just for their own culture, but for women. Just imagine if we all just, Earth Day, was that March 15th or something like that? April 15th, we turned off the lights? Right? What if small businesses just did that? What would happen? Would our voices be heard louder? Do we have to go to that drastic step? I certainly hope not. But what if? Get educated, learn. MackeyCompany.com. I have a podcast called ProcurementGames.org. I talk openly about this type of stuff, and with risk, obviously. But please, 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 I encourage everybody who's here, who's listening online, pay attention to anything that runs across and smells like DEI on your feed, on TikTok, on whatever it is. And just click the link and read. Because, like I said earlier, the Florida State University said we're removing DEI, and all DEI-focused programs. Procurement and contracting is getting affected, and if you're in procurement and contracting, you need to know what you're entering to. Thank you.
So kind of ditto based on what Lynn had just shared. There's nothing like some good data. When you start showing, and then I'm going to give y'all some good nuggets, so get your pen and paper out, okay? Some people like to talk about percentages when they talk about things that have to deal with us. I said, nah, I want to see numbers. Don't aggregate the data. I want the disaggregated data. Because when we do that, because they love saying minority this. I live in Austin. They say, oh, our minority participation is just so high. I say, really? Well, let me see the numbers. Show me those numbers. And we know that white women continue to win. So when we do that, we can show that there's a disparity there. And sometimes we have to, change up our language or whatever it is, but remind them that we are taxpayers too. And that all taxpayers should have an opportunity to be able to be a part of the economy in a way where we can grow our companies so that we can also have sustainable businesses. So when you ask for the numbers, push a little bit more, and get not percentages, but when you see, and also dollar amounts. So when you see the actual dollar amounts that are being spent in our communities, even if you have to ask it by zip code, sometimes you have to be creative so they won't be like, okay, and sometimes these numbers aren't even there, but you have to be creative on how you get it, the information. Don't get the percentages, get the dollar amounts, and sometimes that's something that you can go to your elected officials and show them, hey, we need to do better by these communities. Because when we do that, then there's more opportunity for them to create more taxpayer base for the country.
Can I add to that real quick? You can request every agency under the Data Practice Act. Every agency must disclose contracts that were awarded, the value of those contracts, and who got it. It's public information. So, yeah, chase after those numbers and play the Data Practice Act. Every agency's got it. Thank you.
Mika?
I would say know your own bias. Take an implicit association test available on Project Implicit by Harvard University. I would say start with the race, IAT, and encourage somebody else to take it and know their own bias. I would say interrupt racism in real time. When you see it happening, find the confidence and the courage to interrupt the best way that you know how. And I would also say activate, take action, find a piece around the DEI space and advocate and find some way to demonstrate some type of activity, some type of action to help progress, advance, and protect diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because to my previous point, I think what the biggest problem is with DEI is that it was successful. It created a sense of fear for a change, and the only way that we're going to combat that fear is through open dialogue and to take action in real time.
Thank you. We have, I think we're going to put it out to questions for a couple of people. You have something you? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So you mentioned, you were talking about trying to educate or advocate. For the 4 or 5 guys on that list you had earlier, can they be talked to? There's no, what's the strategy for them? There's no mistaking. They don't mistake who they are or what they're doing. So, what's the strategy for that?
So I would argue, actually, that they're not aware. I know it seems that is not the case, but you'll be surprised. And I say that because there is a certain politician whose name we shall not discuss, but once I tell the scenario, you all will know who it is. And he was asked, what are you doing for the Black population? What are you doing for African Americans? And the response was, well, I have a new crime bill that helps criminals get access to more activities in jail. Because mentally, they said Black people, but for him, it's synonymous with criminals. So be happy, Black people, because there's new activities in jail. I helped you out. And that is a stark demonstration of ignorance. And so when I say they're not as aware as we think, I do think there's opportunity to educate. And I do think there is we should at least start with that. I'm not saying that's going to be the end-all, be-all, and it's certainly not going to be the cure, because some people are not unconscious bias, some people are outright racist, and that's a decision that they make when they get up in the morning. But I do think that there's a lot of ignorance. We mistake wealth and riches for intelligence. And because these are very wealthy individuals that were just up on the screen, there is a faulty assumption that we're dealing with people who have a high level of intelligence, and I think that is mistake number one. So I do think there's some opportunity there. Will we get, wonderful results? Probably not, but there still needs to be some level of education, because there is certainly a lack of understanding in general.
And I would even add to that, having a conversation. So we may not know the four of them up there, whatever the number is, but we do know potentially somebody who knows them through our networks. And so sometimes we can get messages to people through networks too, right? My systems engineer back there who was just on the panel, that's what it is, that network, that systems. There's systems of networking that can happen that can also make a difference. So you could say, hey, get this message to so-and-so. Let him hear a different perspective. Maybe he hasn't thought about this, not sure if he knew about this, but just let me to sow that seed. And so what can happen over time is that person's like, who is this sending me all these messages? And then they want to come and talk to us to hear a different perspective. And then when you get that meeting, don't come, just ready to just pounce on them. Come from a perspective of really wanting, even though they may have done some egregious things that you're like, I can't even. But it starts with a conversation, a different perspective, and being heard.
It seemed like we're going right into the Q&A. Go ahead.
Shout out to being heard. As an advocate of college students, and then of course a lot of the young people that are not here, how do HBCUs and tribal or minority-serving institutions, excited about trying to get in the job market, how do they really apply to jobs? Should they actually put their ethnic background, or should they just keep it blank as a way of, is there any activism with not putting anything down, or should you actually put what you really are, especially if you're mixed?
So there's two ways to kind of answer that. I'll start with this one. To a certain degree, it doesn't even matter. Racism is deeply rooted. And so even if I don't mark woman, African American, there are going to be certain things about my profile that's going to lead to someone to assume I'm an African American woman. So whether I checked the box or I didn't, the impact of racism could still be there. I think that's a very personal decision right now on whether or not to disclose. The Vice President of Human Resources had a side of me as saying always disclose, because if they don't have the data, then they don't have a starting point to have any type of solutions if there is a disparity. And so you're not arming the individuals within that organization who's charged with to do something about things that's not going right. You're not giving them the ammunition that they need. But right now, within this climate, it's very much a personal decision. But yeah, my HR hat would say absolutely share your information, and should things not go your way, you at least have some documentation to support whatever conclusions you have about whether or not you were included.
And then when you do get the job, if you do get the job, then there's this understanding from, maybe I'm just too old school, but if you want to receive this, fine. If not, it's okay. But there's this conversation about bringing your whole self to work. Well, I think that depends on where you are working. So if you're working with somebody in an organization that maybe they're kind of suit and tie kind of thing, and that's not your thing, and you're flip-flops and shorts and wrinkled t-shirts like they do in Austin, that may not be the place for you. And don't take it personally, but there is a culture that is already in place before you even thought about working there. And so even though you want to be your authentic self, just think about who's really signing your check. It's controversial to even say that, because you might be like, I can be what I want, I know who I'm, understood. But these are some things that you may experience in the workplace, and then when you get there and you're not feeling welcome and you're feeling excluded, it might not be because of your skin color. It could be because you are not with the type of culture, and again, this is take it how you want it, but there is a certain culture that each company has, and their brand is important to them, the things that they do. So sometimes, we get mad and we want to say racism, but maybe it's us. Maybe we didn't, kind of do some things that are expected regardless of what your race is.
Holly, you have a question?
No, I
I know
was
she
just-
does all our recruitment.
I know you're trying to wrap up, so I'll just echo. I think reporting and even sharing a photo on LinkedIn is important these days as someone that does recruiting. A lot of well-intended organizations are trying to make sure they have diverse panels of candidates. And even if you don't apply, they're going out places like LinkedIn, looking at qualifications and experience and education and asking, would you be interested in applying for this job? So don't limit your opportunities. And also, if you end up at a company that cares about how you identify in the application process, to your point, you probably don't want to work there.
Kevin, did you have something else?
Anybody else? I wanted to,
Someone else has another question, I know.
I just got a real quick question. Can I get in on the Monopoly game?
You get in first round.
so I have one question, then you guys can end. I heard what everyone said about, it may be something other than race. But if that's the case, then why are the racial numbers so bad?
Yeah, but let's just face it. Sometimes when we come into the workplace, we're not prepared. Sometimes we come in, we're late. Sometimes we're coming in, we're not doing our work on time. Sometimes the work that we're doing is substandard. And as a CEO for 24 years, I am speaking from experience. So I've given people opportunities who look like me. I've given people opportunities who I feel they have the potential, but they don't want to do the work. They want to get my job and my title with no experience. So I'm just keeping it 100 with you because that also happens. And you're absolutely right. Of course there's a racism issue. Like Dr. Still would say, it's racism. Of course. We know that that's in existence too. And there have been times when I've been blessed to get an opportunity that I wasn't prepared for, but guess what I did? I went and got prepared. I learned, I studied, I was doing all kinds of things, learning about their culture, finding about what's going on in their organization, so that when I came in there would be no excuse for people to be like, why is she here? No, I'm going to come in and be 1,000% of excellent.
And I have to add to that because in procurement and contracting, as certified small businesses, we don't come to the table ready, right? And I'll go into construction. Yeah, it's hard when we're not ready. We have capabilities. We can do the work.
Right.
But do we want to do the work? We're even selective of the work that we choose to do. It's easy to put the blame on them, but we really got to look at the man in the mirror, right? Look at the man in the mirror and go, what am I doing to right-size me so they can say no, right? That is Mackey Company's thing. I dare you to say no after I teach my subcontractors how to read plans, do business, do project management, do job costing. I dare you to say no, right? I dare you to say no. When I got my stuff together, be that person, right? But be humble enough, I guess, and recognize what your weaknesses are and seek someone who can help elevate you. But don't just go to that person and say, can you elevate me? You got to give something in return. That's a partnership and mentorship. We can't just keep taking. We also got to give. And so, I'd say, yeah, look at the man in the mirror and be like, what can I do to improve myself? Or the girl. Thank you.
I know Kevin has
Definitely
another question.
agree with my colleagues on that point. However, I also have to say, and this may be the unpopular position, the bar is different. And we have to be real about that as well, right? So, yeah, maybe, they didn't come prepared. Maybe they weren't 100% ready. But I can probably show you 5 non-diverse individuals in that same position, and there were certain graces offered. And so I think while that's completely true, it also forces us to acknowledge that our parents were right. As much as we might not want to believe that, our parents were right? Your A is their C, so you better get 100 plus if you want to be considered, because that is just your ticket in the door, and that is going to be compatible to someone else's mediocrity, and that's real. That's real, and so that's also part of the dynamic. So you talk about being ready, you have to be more, to her point, you have to be more than ready, because you're going to be recognized far more easily than someone who doesn't look like you and is also not ready.
So does that
Then
mean you
ask for a
guys-
debrief also, too. So even in contracting, you can do that. If you didn't get the contract, say, hey, just want to take a couple of moments and just ask for the debrief. And if you didn't get the position that you thought you should have had, if they'll grant that, ask for it too. And they really could give you some amazing feedback, but also they may bring some feedback that's sketchy, and you're like, well, maybe I need to bring my attorney to this debrief.
So does
Is that
that
the
mean you guys
direction
agree
you were
with
going,
the...
even?
Hold on, yeah, no, I have, so does that mean you guys agree with the anti-DEI stuff? You think these lawsuits are going in the right direction?
Now, where did you get that from?
I've never heard anyone say all this, people aren't prepared. I'm like, okay, so...
Oh, no. I'm not saying that.
I think what she was trying to say, that there are times that people are, thank you for bringing that up, that there are cases, there's always cases they're not prepared, but part of the big picture about that is that we don't have the support sometimes to get ready. I think, is that what I think you were saying? We don't have the support system or the resources to get ourselves ready. But you're right. Now, it has nothing probably to do with being ready. As she mentioned, we have our president that was a C person, and he became president. If you're a black man and you are a C, you're not going to make it president. You won't make it probably for a lot of things. So again, you have to work just as hard. I don't think the message is that. I think what they're saying is that there's an opportunity to really look at yourself, look at what you bring to the table, and then seek out support. Not in that particular, I think that's what they're trying to say.
Yep.
But it's not always that. It's not always that way. You're right. Sometimes you're eliminated just because of all the things that that they said. And then we have blind resumes that they've sent. If your name is a certain way, and if your name is Kishan or whatever, you might not get called back. And then
Or if it's a blind
research
name
has
and it just
indicated that.
says Howard University.
Yeah.
Same thing. So we can act like we're doing all these efforts to not consider race, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really make any sense to do that, because it's always going to be a factor, and we might as well be proactive about it so that it's done in a positive way.
One of the things that happened with the Harvard, right? It wasn't so much that affirmative action was we were allowing because of affirmative action. And I'm going to lose this numbers because this is not the real number. But let's just say that there were 100 applications that had perfect SAT scores. And 60% were non-minorities, and 40% were minorities. That was the argument in Harvard, that they based it on race. They already had their legacy. They already had the rich folks that can afford tuition, and they certainly had Asians who could afford to send their children in Harvard. So what they were really talking about was the rest, right? The rest. The average non-minority that actually got, is it 1,600 in SAT, 1,800, whatever that is. But then there were also the average minority. And the lenses that should, godlike words, should have been operating at that time was, what are the chances of a black, a Latino entering Harvard? Because Asians are in, right? Legacies are in, folks who can afford it are in. So what are they really stating when they said affirmative action? It's the two ethnic groups, the two races, that have not had the advantage in affirmative action, and that was blacks and Latinos. So that's the scary part of the effects of this. They're calling out specific racial groups without calling us out, without so stating, because we've risen and acknowledged that the black community has not had its equal opportunity when they were the basis of Civil Rights Act of 1866. We've stood on the shoulders of black people, as immigrants, as brown people. and as women. We've stood on the shoulders of of Black people. So when you think about it in that way, and now it's affecting procurement and contracting, and it just trickles down, and we are not aware, we got to get aware, right? And so that's our fight. They're not fighting us at the low level, guys. They're fighting us up here. They're fighting us from the sides. And the next thing we know, because we are not aware,
Thank you.
it's gone. Thank you.
I think we ran over our time. Thank you for this great panelists, and we want to make sure we get across that DEI is not reverse discrimination. It's about making sure we're bringing everyone to the table, fairly treating everybody. It's a sense of belonging. And I heard the lady said that it's about looking at the data, looking at the numbers, and looking at your biases. Thank you very much, and thank you to Kevin Brady for all the work that they've done. Go ahead.
Thank you, Denise. So thank you, everybody, for coming. We're going to wrap it up. This was a good session. We picked a little fight. It was fun. There's a lot to fight. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of active, the core of this conversation was about advocacy. And advocacy is important, so important. We've been on the Hill, some of us all this week, and we've seen that we need to advocate and make sure that at the end of the day, we have our voices heard and our policies, even if we have nuances, that our policy, that we're at the table making the policies that get made. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening and participating, and good night.